28. In verse number 1, the Bible reads, "In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and another Mary to see the sepulchre or the grave." We understand that Jesus rose on the first day of the week. And because we don't know which first day it was, the Church of Christ, we honor every first day of the week.
Yes.
We commune every first day of the week. We talk about the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ every first day of the week. We put an emphasis on that every Sunday. So this Sunday might be something special to the world. It's special to us every Sunday. So what we're actually talking about today, with a lot of unease in the world and people just kind of unsure about things, just the way the world is going. I want to talk this month on the providence of God. And regardless of the times, we're fine. The providence of God, the definition of providence is the guided force and protected care of God. See, as God's children, we operate up under providence. The world might see coincidence, but we operate up under providence. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are called according to his purpose. And generations and times don't expire God being God. God is God in 2026 like he was God when he created Adam. Time has no bearing on God's power and who God is. And I just want to talk this month on just the providence of God and just knowing that we are in he's in our affairs. He's in the affairs of his children, and time has no bearing on him. Matter of fact, one day to him could be 1,000 years, just like 1,000 years could be one day. He's not bound by time.
That's right. That's right.
He's God. And I want us to be mindful that during the days of Noah, God said, man was bad during that time. And their hearts are on evil continuously. And so what we're going through today, it's no different than man has always been evil. Man has always been bad, but God has always been God. And so we're going to talk this month on some characters and some personalities in the Bible and watch how God moved in their lives the same way that he's moving in our life. And for the sake of Easter, I chose Esther. So I think, I hope that'll suffice for some people. We're going to be looking at the book of Esther, and we're going to look at some background information on Esther, and then we're going to look at 3 points. We'll look at God's children are favored. God's children are favored. The second point, God's children are faithful. And then the third point, God's children are protected. But before we get into the lesson, I want to give us like a parental perspective. Imagine like you as a parent. You have all the influence in the world. You have all the wealth in the world. You have a military force behind you that's second to none. And you have all resources. What would your children be lacking? Or what would you let your children go without? Now I want to give us a perspective from a child's view. And this time I don't want you to imagine, I want you to consider. Because you don't have to imagine this, consider this. Your father has all power in his hand. He has all the gold and silver in the world. Every beast in the forest is his. The cattle on 1,000 hills are his. He has command over legions of angels. If you want to know the power of angels, one day just go read 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 35, just the power of one. Our Father has all of that. And just like I gave you the perspective as if you were the parent and you had all of that, how well would you take care of your kids? And we being human, and we being evil at times, and we're not being loved the way God is loved. If we had all of those things, and think about how we provide for our children. Now think about God. Now think about God having those things. How he cares for us. How he cares for us. What can our Father not provide for us? What can our Father not provide for us? Turn with me to Esther chapter 1. And we're going to paraphrase, we're going to skip through, but we're going to try to give you the story of Esther. And to we understand the more popular stories of Joseph being sold and then becoming governor. We understand Daniel being thrown into the Daniel's den and then becoming second in charge. But God has been doing that the whole time. And the book of Esther is a book that you probably won't even see the word God in all of Esther. But his hand is all over the doings and the affairs of men. And so in Esther chapter 1 and through the chapter 1, now I'm going to paraphrase. All right, so this is King Ahasuerus. And he's a wealthy king. And he owns everything. His province reigned from India to Ethiopia. And he's a very wealthy man. And his third reign as king, he wanted to show off his kingdom. So he showed off his kingdom, and his kingdom was so big, it took him about 180 days to show off all of his kingdom. And after showing off all of his kingdom, he had a feast for all the men there. And you can go home and read Esther. But he has this feast for all the men. And they had the finest of everything. They were in a room where everything was decorated to the T. They were drinking wine out of golden cups. He had wine in abundance. And he's showing off his kingdom. But the queen, Vashti, and another part of the kingdom, she's having a get together for all the women. So while King Ahasuerus is doing this for the men, Vashti, she's doing this for all of the women. And about 7 days in this party of drinking, and the king, he sent for Vashti. He sent for Vashti. Vashti was a beautiful woman, and he wanted to show off, amidst showing off the kingdom to all the men, he wanted to show off his wife. Well, Queen Vashti, she refused to come. And it embarrassed the king. And it made him upset. And he seized counsel to say, man, what do we need to do with Vashti, who's went against the king's orders? And they came up and said, King, not only has she done wrong to you, this wrong has been done to all men, because all women are going to see the lead of Vashti, and they're going to treat Vashti, they're going to treat their husbands the way that Vashti treated the king. So they said, you know what? You need to put Vashti away, and you need to find one that's better. And this decree, it went out throughout his reign that he was going to put Vashti away, and he was going to find one that's better. God's children are favored. Within this selection, there's a mix of the people some Jews. And the king, they decided, we're gonna seek out a bunch of young virgins, and we're gonna put them in this house for women, for purifications, and we're gonna get them fit to go take Vashti's place. Well, amongst those women is this lady by the name of Esther, and she's a Jewish woman, and Esther, amongst the kings, amongst the house of women, she was a woman that everybody that saw her and that was around her favored her. Right. And so after all the women would go into the king, the one that the king liked the most and thought and knew by name, that was going to be the one to take Vashti's place. So it was Esther's turn to come. And what they did, when it's your turn to go see the king, and since they paid you to take whatever the stuff you want out of the house of women, take it with you. Well, when it was Esther's time, she didn't want to take anything. She went and she saw the king. And the king saw favor in Esther. The king saw favor in Esther. And Esther became the queen. Now she's a Jew. And this is not known yet. But Esther became the queen. Turn with me to Esther chapter 2. Verse 20. We'll read verse 20 and 23. Esther is the daughter of a guy named Mordecai. Esther had lost her parents, and Mordecai is raising Esther as his own. And so in verse 20 of chapter 2, it says, Esther had not yet shown her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up. Mordecai told her, look, right now, you don't need to know, they don't need to know that you're Jew. They don't need to know that. In verse 21, and in those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlain, Bigtan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wrought and sought to lay hand on King Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it to Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof of Mordecai's name. So Mordecai, God has Mordecai sitting in an area where he overhears somebody plotting to kill the king. Well, Mordecai hears it. And Mordecai gives this information to Esther. Verse 23. And when the acquisition was made of this matter, it was found out, therefore, they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. So Mordecai made known to King Ahasuerus, these guys, they have to kill you. And he gives us information. So these people, these two men, they're hanged. And this is going to pay dividends for Mordecai later on. So I want you to imagine, in King Ahasuerus' palace, there's a Jewish woman that have become the queen. And now this is man Mordecai, her uncle or her dad, he's made known to the king, or made known to the servants of the king, that there's a plot to kill the king. And this makes sense to us later on. God's children are faithful. And the Bible lets us know that we ought to be faithful even unto death. In Esther chapter 3, Esther chapter 3, turn with me there. Haman is a guy that's the king's right-hand man. I'm going to read verses 1 through 6. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, and Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. Watch this here. Mordecai being a Jew and being God's people, Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Then the king's servants, which were in the king's gate, said unto Mordecai, why transgressest thou the king's commandment? Now it came to pass when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened to them not, they went and told Haman. And they said, see whether this Mordecai, see if he'll stand. For he had told him that he was a Jew. They went and told Haman that Mordecai is a Jew. Verse 5. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath. See, Mordecai being a Jew, Mordecai understood that as children of God, we don't reverence any man.
Amen.
Do y'all understand that? We respect everybody. We love everybody, but we don't bow down and we don't worship to anybody. And so Mordecai being a child of God, all the other servants, they bow down to Haman, but he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it. Look at verse 6. And he thought, scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had shown him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even to the people of Mordecai. So Mordecai understood that this could bring harm to me. But Mordecai is no different than the 3 Hebrew boys. Remember the 3 Hebrew boys? Yeah. Mordecai is no different than Daniel. Remember Daniel? As children of God, there are some things that have been set in place, and we have to obey those things regardless of even if it puts our lives in jeopardy. So Mordecai, he couldn't give reverence. He couldn't bow to this man. Matter of fact, if you look at the word reverend, it's somebody that's due reverence. Somebody that's due worship. That's why in the Church of Christ, the guy standing at the door, he's a brother. The guy up here in the pulpit, he's a brother, because the word reverend, you got to see this. This one brought the lesson, but you got to see it. Reverend is someone that's due reverence, or to be revered. That means someone that's due worship. So nobody on planet Earth is worth reverence or worship. That's why we're not reverence. We don't worship man. You can come to Brother Curry and confront Brother Curry just like you could the guy, standing at the water fountain. God's people are not people that are respected of people. We respect, we love all, but we can't bow down. Nobody's going to be a master to us. Nobody's going to be a rabbi. Nobody's going to be a reverend to us, because we can't do it. Mordecai couldn't do it. The 3 Hebrew boys couldn't do it. Daniel couldn't do it. We can't do it.
We'll see.
At the cost of life.
That's right.
At the cost of life. So we're going to paraphrase, but we're going to have time to hit all of this. So from Esther, about chapter 3, verse 8 to about 4:17, I'm going to highlight some points. So Haman told the king, and this is these people scattered out in your kingdom, they got different laws than everybody else. That sound like somebody? that sound like somebody kind of scattered out across the city of Fort Still, kind of scattered out across America, and they laws, they deal a little bit differently. They a little bit different than everybody else. And for that reason, he asked the king, you need to let me go ahead and knock off all these people. We're going to go ahead and kill all these people. They don't bow down to us. We're going to go ahead and kill them. And the king gave permission for that to happen. Mordecai found out. And he sent word to Esther to intervene. But Esther responded like, during this time, the king, he's in the inner court. And he's going to be there for a while. And whenever the king is in the inner court, you can't go to him. Because somebody go while he's in that inner court, the punishment is death. While the king is in the royal inner court and he's there alone, he's there by himself and can't nobody come into the king. So Mordecai had told us he didn't go intervene with the king, but Esther said, look, he's in that inner court, I can't go in there. Mordecai sent word again to Esther. And when she heard him read, he said, don't think that you escaped because you're the queen or you're in the king's house. Don't think that you're going to escape. It's going to come down on you too. He said, if you don't speak up, now the Jews, somebody going to deliver us. Because we got people, Mordecai knew some kind of way, we're going to be delivered. But for you and your family, you can easily be destroyed. So that's the same word back to Mordecai. She said, have our people for 3 days and 3 nights to fast for me. I'm going to go into the king in the inner court. If I die, I die. But I'm going to go into the king on the behalf of my people. Let's see the king's response to Esther. Esther chapter 5, verses 1. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day, and Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. And it was when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. The king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king to her, what wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what dost thou request? It shall be even to thee half the kingdom. So Esther goes in at the threat of having her life, and he goes, he begs, come on in. What do you need? Whatever you need, I'll give it to you. Even if you want half of the kingdom, I'll give it to you. Verse 4. And Esther answered, even if it seemed good unto the king, let the king and Haman. Now Haman is one out to kill him. Let the king and Haman come this day to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, cause Haman to make haste, and that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Now Esther's there, the queen, Jew, with her husband, the king, and with Haman, this man that's out here and he's ready to kill Jews. God's children, we're protected. Isaiah lets us know in Isaiah 54:17, no weapon that is formed against us shall prosper.
Thank you, Lord.
Haman is out to kill the Jews. Esther chapter 6. Esther chapter 6. Verses 1 through 3. Look at this here. On that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to them to bring the book of records into the Chronicles. And there where he read before the king, and as it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlain, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on King Ahasuerus. Remember at the beginning when Mordecai found out about this plot to kill the king, they ended up hanging the man. And so, look at verse 3. And the king said, what honor and dignity have been done to Mordecai for this? Then said the king's servant that ministered to him, there's nothing been done. The king this night before the banquet, he's sometimes get restless at night, so he couldn't sleep, so he went and got his book of records. And he got to reading, and he found out, wait a minute, this guy Mordecai that stopped these guys from killing me, what honor, what was given to Mordecai? What was done to this guy that stopped these men from killing me? And his servant said, well, nothing. done to Mordecai? Watch this here. Pick up at verse 4, and we'll read through 10. And the king said, who was in the court? Now Haman was coming to the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared. Now, if you go back and read, the king, Haman, him and his sons, they prepared these gallows that they have these Jews hung. Read verse 4 again. And the king said, who was in the court? Now Haman was come in the outward court of the king's house and speaking to the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that had been prepared for him. And the king's servant said unto him, behold, Haman standeth in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, what shall be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, to whom would be the king delighted his honor was talking about him. So Haman is in the court, and the king called and said, you know, what should be done to a man that the king wants to honor? And automatically Haman, thinking that the king is talking about him. Verse 7. And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought, which the king useth to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head, and let this apparel and the horse be delivered into the hand of the one of the king's most noble princes, that they array the man withal with the king's whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth. So Haman gives these bright ideas to do to this man that the king is honoring, thinking it's going to be him. Look at verse 10. Then the king said to Haman, make haste and take the apparel and the horse, and as thou hast said, and do even to Mordecai the Jew, that sitteth at the king's gate, let nothing fail of all that has been spoken. So now, this Haman, who's out to kill Mordecai the Jews, he's having to give honor to this Mordecai. He had set up these gallows to hang Mordecai and his people. He had set himself up for these gifts to be heaped upon him, and he gives the king all these ideas, but it wasn't for him. It was for Mordecai. I'll paraphrase through Esther chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. So this next day, this banquet has to go on between the king, Haman, and Esther. The king and Haman, they're the main guests. King asked Esther, what do you want? And he told her again, whatever you want, I'll even give to you half of the kingdom. If you want half of the kingdom, I'll give you half of the kingdom. Esther tells the plans to kill her and her people. And the king asks, who is it? And she said, it's Haman. It's Haman. He's wanting to kill me and my people. The king stood up with wrath and he left. And Haman starts pleading. I got to read this. Turn to verse 7. That's the 7, verse 7. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden, and Haman stood up to make request of his life to Esther the queen, for he saw there was evil determined against the king. So when the king jumps up with wrath and he leaves, there Haman is standing with Esther. And he's like, oh. Now pleading to Esther, the Jew, for his life. He's pleading to Esther for his life. Look at verse 8. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of the wine, and Haman, what? Was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. So Esther sitting on the bed, and Haman, he's so sick, he just fell on the bed. Now the king walking there, and you let in the bed with my wife? Why is this here? Then the king returned, verse 8 again. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed wherein Esther was. Then said the king, will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, and before the king, behold, also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standing in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. That was the king's wrath pacified. So Mordecai and the Jews go from, if you read the whole story, there's a lot of good stuff in there. They go from fearing their lives because of this Haman. And Haman had these gallows prepared to hang God's children. And instead, Haman is the one that was hanged. And he was hanged in the gallows that he prepared for God's children. Throughout the Bible, this is a story that is rarely read. If you keep reading the story, Mordecai becomes second in command. It's the king, then Mordecai.